Hello everyone, I'm Sumhiya Sallay and I'll be the moderator for today's second panel discussion on youth engagement for sustainable development. I thank you all for joining us today and I welcome our distinguished panelists. I will first start with Dr. Abbas. Thank you so much for making time for us, especially in your busy schedule. So I would like to start by asking you, what does sustainable development mean and how would you define it? Sandra, I believe you'll have to unmute Dr. Abbas.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thanks so much. Well, thanks so much. I've been tuning in between my clinic and it's been really fascinating. So really exciting to be part of this. I think sustainable development, by most definitions is basically looking at how we can develop, how we can grow, how we can create the world that we want to live in today, but also to ensure that we are able to safeguard that world for the future generations to come. How do we expand? Our population is so big. How do we develop? How do we use all the things and tools at our disposal without using up all of the resources on the planet, without thinking in the short term? So sustainable development is all about looking at the long-term impact of everything we do today, whilst ensuring that we also continue to develop today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abbas. I would like to direct another question for you. It's on, so you are a trustee for the Hussain Foundation, working towards empowering communities worldwide. How would you say the youth can engage in charities and what difference can they make?
Well, I think in my opinion and from my experience, I think the youth are really, they're the ones who will actually drive change. They're the ones who will actually drive all of our development, more than anyone actually, because when you're young, you've got energy, you've got enthusiasm, you have got positivity, but also you don't necessarily have the wariness sometimes that comes on as we get older, as we try things, as sometimes we find difficulties and the challenges that come with time. And that's not to say that getting older is necessarily a negative thing. It just basically means, in my opinion, that when you're young and when you're in that time of your that youth, you can really do a lot. What we found with Hussain, when we started, we were all very young. I was a junior doctor at that time. Most of us were either at university, students in our late teens, early 20s, and yet 7-8 years later we've managed to create a charity that has 70 plus teams around the world, across every continent. We've over the last 3-4 months with COVID-19 we've been able to impact and support over 100,000 people during the crisis, and it's all come from youth. So I think when you look at the power of youth, the power of ingenuity, the thought, the ability to look at a problem in a completely different way to what has been the old model, to innovate, to try new things. These are all beautiful attributes that young people have. And I think, and I hope, fingers crossed, that I am still slightly in that category of young people. And I think it's really important for us to take that energy and especially when we're young, use it. There's a lovely saying in one of the Hindu textbooks, one of the Hindu texts, the Gita, and it says, give your best flower to God. Someone told me this. He said, give your best flower to God. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, when you're old and you have time and you might have established yourself and you have money, you can definitely support charity work. You can definitely support initiatives with finances, but you don't have that energy, that vim, that vigor to do more. When you can give your best flower, that fresh, growing, nurturing flower to serve, that's the best time. So I think it's a really, really powerful concept.
Yes, thank you very much. It's definitely important for the youth who are like young and who are able to use their energy at this time to really make change. The final question I would like to ask from you, Dr. Abbas, is that in the context of COVID, we may be restricted to move around and engage in various activities. However, there are other ways in which we as the youth can make change, just like this Zoom webinar, where we come together virtually or by following health guidelines to promote sustainable development. What are other ways in which we can promote sustainable development? Dr. Abbas, you're muted. Sandro, can you please check on that?
I think Sandro's had enough of me. Remind me the question again. It was about
it's on how we can promote sustainable development in other ways.
Yeah, I think this is a really good start. And I think one thing we have to do is we have to get like-minded individuals who want to make a difference, who want to think long-term, and get them together. Now, look, we're in COVID-19. You know, we have been under the cosh. We've been really busy throughout the world. But think about how amazing this seminar is. We've got 70 plus people on the call right now. Many will tune in afterwards and listen and catch up to learn from each other about how we can develop and use those ideas. So I think the first thing is getting the like-minded people in a platform like this. I think the other thing is, and one of the speakers said it earlier, and it's something that we have at Hussain as well, is you don't have to change the whole world straight away. You can change your world. You can affect change in the areas you can affect change. So, for example, in Hussain, well, we don't tell people, why don't me in London go off and do something in another part of the world? Well, actually, why don't I here in London start looking at the issues that exist here? I've got the infrastructure. I know friends, family. I know communities. I know different teams. I know charities. I know the area. I know the logistics. I know the geography. How about I start working where I am? So a lot of us are really keen to go off and create big organizations. It will come slowly. But the most important thing is, how can I make change in my locality? How can I make change here? So I also think, yes, let's get together and think, and let's brainstorm. And the second thing is, in your own time, start looking at your local area. And something we do a lot in the conflict and catastrophe medicine field that I work in is we look at doing a needs assessment. So what does that mean? That means, why don't we look at what the actual need is? Sometimes we say, look, I really want to do something. I really want to create an orphanage. I really want to create a school. But actually, that might not be the most powerful thing I can do with my time. That might not be something that works with sustainable development. How can I use environmental goals, use the current issues right now with a needs assessment, and then mix the two together, amalgamate them, meet in the middle, and create something that really works? So I think there's many things we can talk about, but I think it's nice to take a couple of key points. And I would say, one, continue these meetings. When we did Hussain, we didn't go from one or two people to a massive organization overnight. We used to meet every week. We used to speak every week, and it was great. We'd have food, we'd have chats, we'd have a laugh, but we'd also work on these goals. So one, meet regularly, even if it's via Zoom or however you want to. And second of all, do a needs assessment for what's there in your locality. Start there, and then you'll find that you can grow quite easily.
Yes, I would agree. Definitely. Consistency is key, and it's important that we start within our communities itself before we look forward into how we can make it bigger and increase our impact. Doctor, so if anyone has any questions, you may please email it or send it to Dr. Abbas's LinkedIn. We will be putting that on the chat box. Unfortunately, he has to leave at the moment because he has a busy schedule. But thank you very much, Dr. Abbas, for joining us. And thank you for your time. Okay, thank you.
Cheers, bye.
Okay, Miss Judith, Miss Anna, and Mr. Jack, we can now have a few discussions. So I would like to start by again giving out a general question for each one of you, and I would the question is, what does sustainable development mean and how would you define it? Miss Judith, we can start with you.
I think the definition that was given earlier was very crisp and very simple. And I would just like to piggyback on that with sustainable development. If there's anything that I could add is like our action, whatever we do today, will not compromise, you know, the potential and the capability of the future. So any actions that we do right now does not compromise the future. So for me, that's what it is. So giving that definition, it just forces you to be really, really mindful that in everything we do, right, there's going to be an impact in the future. If there's going to be a compromise in a negative sense, then I would say maybe that's not really towards sustainable development.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Jack, would you have any comments on that as well? Sandro, can you please unmute? Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. And good morning and afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us today. And thank you very much to Citizens for the opportunity to speak to you about sustainable development and also the integral importance and potential applications of digital technologies in striving to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Youth tend to be the most digitally fluent of all generations. And so for the duration of this session, I'd like to position my contributions through the lens of digital technologies serving as a vehicle for youth to most powerfully contribute to sustainable development. And so I did have a few thoughts on sustainable development. Ultimately, it is the betterment, it's the mission for the betterment of our species and our planet. And as the founder and chairman of LiteHaus International, an Australian youth-led charity which has provided digital learning opportunities to 8,600 children around the world, I've always viewed the fundamental mission of sustainable development to be removing obstacles to opportunity for individuals to achieve their full potential. Most of the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, concern themselves with bridging inequities, which quite rightly implies that inequality is an obstacle to sustainable societies and a sustainable world. The fact is that an unequal society of haves and have-nots is just not sustainable economically, environmentally, or socially. And to me, the Sustainable Development Goals, they serve as the guiding light for humanity, but also the triple bottom line for every action and every endeavour that we as individuals undertake. And so, LiteHaus International focuses on one form of inequality in particular, and as our contribution towards the SDGs, and that is bridging the digital divide. Digital inequity truly is, in my opinion, the most underestimated of all in the development agenda. Which truly blows my mind, honestly, and it has done ever since I founded LiteHaus International. All of us here, either on this panel or in the audience, we have different backgrounds, different standards of living, and different lived experiences, yet we're all enabled to be in this forum due to digital access and digital fluency. As I mentioned earlier, sustainable development, to me, it's the business of removing barriers to opportunity. And so I'll leave it at that for now. But I look forward to sharing my thoughts on how I've witnessed the provision of digital access and digital literacy truly change lives by placing the extraordinary array of our world's opportunities at the fingertips of those long denied. So once again, thank you for having me on this panel. And if anyone has any questions, at the end of this session, please get in touch with me, search LiteHaus, and send me a message.
Thank you so much. Ms. Anna, what would you like to say about sustainable development and what it means?
So I'd like to echo everyone else's sentiments on it. I think they've all been really precise and good. I think for me, it's about looking not only at the big picture of what's going on globally and how we can develop solutions and working practices to create that development that we need to change those, but also going to what is going on locally within your street or within your country, or and looking at ways that we can develop there, because as someone said earlier, as Dr. Abbas said earlier, is that actually we don't need to change everything all at once. We need to develop slowly and have it so that it is sustainable, because every decision we make now has an impact in the future. And also that the things that we create now are sustainable for the long term. They're not just a 5-minute change. They're something that can impact and be sustainable in our working solutions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would now like to direct a few questions to each of our panelists. So Ms. Judith, I would like to start with you. You are a very experienced trainer, facilitator, and L&DS professional in areas such as leadership development. How would you say the youth and young people can take up leadership roles and utilize it for sustainable development? Mahes, can you unmute?
Okay, so I think I'm good to go now. That is a wonderful question. And I think I've been in the profession of leadership development for almost 2 decades. So I think for most of you, I can be considered as an auntie or a mom. And one of the reasons why I keep on doing what I do is because of the potential that I see in a lot of the young people, because I started very, very young as well. So as these are some of the notions or some of the trends that I see, at least in my practice, both here and abroad. So what I could say is, what I see, how young people are emerging as leaders, I see them as change makers, not in a traditional sense. So what I mean by that is they're working on the edges. So during my time, right, we go to the traditional path. We go to education, we get employment, right? And once we're employed, right, we try to make the changes there. And so once we've made money, perhaps that's when we do more outside of that traditional, path. Now what I see is young people, this is already a testament to it. I remember before when I would want to engage with others, I would definitely engage people within my university. So now what I see in the young people now, there are no more barriers. I think it was Jack who said that, no more barriers. So that's what I see in young people. They don't see barriers, but what they see are connections. So in whatever role they are, how young they are, whenever they come to my program, what I notice is compared to the leaders I've worked with during my generation, the young people now don't necessarily have to be told. They're more curious, they explore, and they need to know why. What's going to be the impact of this thing? Why do we have to make profit? Why does the business venture have to be this way? Why do I have to do this role? Why do I have to be sitting behind a computer for 8 hours? I need to know why. What is the benefit of that in others? I see heads nodding there. And that is, I know that maybe, in the past, we've had some sort of a little bit of misunderstanding. Our generation thinking you're going to be a difficult generation. So on behalf of my generation, let me say, I'm so sorry. Now we're understanding that is what we need most right now, understanding your generation. When I'm seeing that you guys are the challengers or the provocateurs, the quality of questions you ask are just amazing, and those that really provoke changes. Another thing, you're not limited by the traditional structures. If you're not getting any impact within a corporate structure, within the government structure, within the traditional education structure, what do? You come up with your own structures, right? You connect with others and do that. And I'm just amazed by the kind of changes that I'm seeing in that regard. So the learning, the space of learning, growth that I'm seeing in your generation astounds me. And I feel like you guys are making my job easier. So it also forces our generation to adapt and to be more compassionate towards you. And instead of us like clashing and competing, you guys are not ready, you cannot be trusted, but give you more space, the respect and the support that you need to let you reimagine the future that you would want to see. So for me, those are just some of the things that I'm seeing, and I'm just blown away by the example. So for example, COVID, I don't know if you know this, but we have one of the strictest lockdown in the world. When I say strictest lockdown, I cannot even go out of my own door. I miss the sunlight. So if any one of you could send me a picture of the sun, please do, especially in Sri Lanka. Oh my God, the Indian Ocean there, right? So, but you know what happened? When problems happen, just on Facebook, these young people, farmers, they're having problems. Their produce are not being sold in the markets because people are not going to markets. You know what the young people did? Let us set up something. So they're the ones, even before the government was able to adapt and provide these mechanisms to support, it's the young people who are doing that. And for me, that gives me a sense of hope and also a motivation to catch up and to learn faster. And instead of me telling, you know what, I've also been changing my role. Instead of telling, I'm just supporting and asking the right questions so that I could harvest on the intelligence of these young people right now who's bringing about these changes. So although there's a lot of problems and some of it could seem daunting, but you guys are giving me a sense of hope that, you know, I still want to be part of this world, no matter how grim it is right now. This is just temporary. So for me, those are some of the things that I'm seeing in the leadership development. And guess what? You guys are owning up leadership at a very young age. You did not need degrees and all that before. We needed to rely on our degrees, on our position. You guys, I'm young, I'm technologically savvy, I'm ready to make change, I'm bold, I'm gonna do it, I'm just gonna start it. So maybe I should be learning from all of you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Judith. I think, yes, it's very important to ask questions and that results in change. And of course, accepting adaptation and accepting change is also very important. Ms. Anna, I would like to ask you a question now. So you have a special interest in challenging stigmas and stereotypes and promoting people using arts. I found this quite interesting, and I'm sure many of our participants today would love to hear more about it. So please do tell us more about it and how you do this.
Yeah, okay. So for me, the arts theatre, it is so powerful. It's not just about watching it. For me, it goes beyond that. It's about working with people to hear their stories, and I don't even mind if I don't make a performance. So the way I work is that actually I want, I'll give an example. I've worked with a group of recovering addicts, and through that we looked at what makes them them, what is their identity, what stigmas do they face when they walk in the street, and how does that impact their ability to recover? Because when somebody is walking down the street and they are looked at in a certain way, they then feel that actually they need to portray that certain way. So that can then put, if they say an addict is, so there is a saying that an addict's always an addict. But actually, if you look at that, that means that you are putting up a barrier to them being able to recover. So what I do is I worked with them to look at what their identity is without that label of an addict, and how we can work towards achieving that and taking their stories out into the public realm, so that actually we can make other people think about removing stigmas, removing stereotypes. And in that, then promoting peaceful communities within their area. So it's about, for me, it's about using the arts, using the creativity that enables, the games, the activities, looking at what identity is. Almost one of the activities I do is we create an island And on that island, we have their characters that they want to be or how they wish to see themselves. And then we look at how those characters interact with the community of that island. So we can then process thoughts and feelings that go with those things in a safe and engaging way that is almost, it's not, it takes it away from them being themselves as well. So they can, there's a sense of anonymity when you create a character and you create a piece of theatre. So you can look at subjects that are really hard to explore, really difficult to discuss, but you can do it in a safe environment in a safe way. So that's why I do it. I mean, Harvey Fierstein says art has the power to transform, to illuminate, to educate, inspire and motivate. And it goes beyond just sitting and watching a play. And that's what I like to promote. It's about, you can create peaceful societies, you can create, there is a lot of history in using theatre to look at, for example, look at the Rwandan genocide. There is a lot of places, there is a theatre that looks at creating court cases that never actually happened, but for the victims of that, they could recreate these things and feel like they can get a little bit of justice themselves and things like that. So I think it is so powerful in what it does.
Thank you. Wow, that's quite interesting. I've never heard of this myself, so I'm sure maybe some of us have heard this for the first time, and that's really, really interesting. Thank you so much, Ms. Anna, for discussing that. Mr. Jack, a question for you. So you work with LiteHaus International, so we would like to know how, as the youth, we can bring change just the way that you have.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. And like I said before, youth tend to be the most digitally fluent of all generations. And so I really do see bridging the digital divide as a vehicle for youth to most powerfully contribute to sustainable development, as I said before. And also, as Judith said, young people, we don't see limits to ambitions anymore. And the fact is that armed with digital mastery, the sky is truly now redundant as a limit to ambition and what we can achieve as a generation. But coming down from those grand statements, the fact is that developing countries and marginalised groups within the developing world are falling further and further behind the growing digital divide. And at LiteHaus International, we aim to position ourselves as a disruption to this trend. We envisage a digitally literate global society where all individuals can harness the immense potential that the technologies of today have to offer. And there are billions of people worldwide who, on a daily basis, are denied opportunities to grow and prosper due to digital illiteracy. And also on our collective journey towards achieving a more sustainable and equitable world, this is an incalculable constraint. Yet far too often, the digital divide is ignored in the agenda to change our world for the better. And for instance, there's no mention of technology or the digital divide in SDG 4, which is the internationally recognized agenda for preparing quality educational outcomes to 2030. And a quality education can only be a digital education in today's world, let alone in 2030. And one really doesn't have to look too far around to realize that's a resoundingly truthful statement. I've been privileged to grow up with access to digital tools. I'm digitally fluent and I live a successful and opportunity-rich life largely because of that. Without access, digital literacy and digital fluency, I wouldn't be able to meet with the immensely talented and passionate group at this summit today, for instance. And also with COVID-19 driving a working remotely culture and business worldwide shifting day to day towards digital operations, can we really say, honestly, that we're providing a quality education to children when it has its ceiling with chalk and dust and blackboards and notebooks? The unfortunate reality is that for most of the world, a digital education is not yet a reality. LiteHaus International has established the first 8 primary school computer labs in all of Papua New Guinea, yet there's still over 3,400 schools across the country whose students will grow up without digital literacy. And the perils of this on national development for developing countries such as Papua New Guinea are both obvious and horrifying. However, we keep the conversation at the individual level. It goes without saying that denying digital access is denying opportunity. And as I mentioned earlier, in my view, that is the core objective of sustainable development, providing equitable opportunities for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jack. We can now discuss a few questions. If you have any questions, please do send it to us in the chat box. Ms. Judith, there is a question from Susit Sirivardana from Sri Lanka, and he asked, why sustainable development goals can't be the goals of government, especially in Asian countries?
Wow, that is a very, very good question. So I think, and also this is what I know, is that the achievement of sustainable goals is embedded, right? So there's a framework that is embedded in national policy, wherever you are in the world. So if you're a signatory of it, right, then there's an expectation that's embedded in your national framework. So in my country, it is, and we did set up a lot of bodies that's going to monitor it. Now, putting it as a goal is totally different, right, from taking the actual steps to meet those goals. And if you're actually going to look at the tracking, I think there's a tracking tool. If you go to the UN SDG website, there's a tracking tool there, and you will find out where you are in those areas. And I think this is going to be the role of everyone in this room or in this space, whether you're a young person or a person coming from an older generation like myself, right? So this is going to be the role. We need to hold our government accountable. We know what these goals are, right? Then we better, if you do not see that in our government, as leaders, right? We're not going to wait for the older generation or the newer generation. Maybe we can take it upon ourselves and just to ask, why don't we make it a part of our national agenda, right? So that's the time where you call on your community leaders in your community, in your school, in your local government, even at the national level, then help that drive that agenda. Remember, the voice of the people are coming from a democratic country. Your voice dictates the agenda. If you're coming from a country with different system, you guys are digital nomads. Use it. Right? So you take whatever platform you have and help drive that agenda, you know, and that's when you would see changes. But it is, if you're a signatory, ideally it's supposed to be part of your national agenda. However, bridging the gap between actually doing it and coming up with policies and funding those policies so that they bring about action is a different case altogether. And that's why that's going to be our role as responsible citizens of our respective nations, to hold our government officials accountable. And let's not be silent about it. We do have a digital platform. I think this conversation that we're having right now is just creating that kind of awareness. So that is my take on that. Maybe the others would want to have a jab on it as well.
Yeah, I might jump in there, Judith. Prior to, well, actually, I interned with the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia Pacific in Delhi, and that was about 2 years ago. And one of the projects I had was actually synthesizing all of the VNRs. So VNRs are voluntary reviews. And so, as you said, most countries adopt the SDGs through a national framework of action. And each year, they're sort of obligated, I guess you'd say, to complete a voluntary national review of how they went. I can tell you now that I know there's a lot of Sri Lankans in the audience, and I had to go through and review all the countries' VNRs in South Asia, so out of 10 countries in that region. And Sri Lanka truly has to be commended for their integration, I think, of the SDGs into their national policies for planning in all realms of sustainable development. But you're definitely right. You know, countries even in the same region, such as South Asia, there is vastly different willingness to integrate the SDGs into national planning. Some countries haven't had a VNR since 2015 when the Sustainable Development Goals happened. So definitely diverse the uptake, I guess.
More work to be done, I guess.
Ms. Anna, if there's anything you would like to add?
I just think One of the challenges that I face here in the UK is that actually the SDGs are not really spoken about. In fact, most of the people I speak to, charities are different, and my network's not very wide, but I do have some connections. And actually, yes, there are some, like with the Commonwealth connections and everything else, they're very relevant in there, and those conversations happen. However, in the general conversations of people in the UK, they don't even know what the SDGs are. They don't even know that they exist. And I think that's one of the big challenges that we face here. And I know that the UK has its own challenges politically that it's working through at the moment. But actually, these things should be part of those political conversations and those agendas. But I think it varies so much across the world on how it is.
And just, I jump on that as well. It's a great point with the political dimensions. The fact of the matter is that the SDGs are planning for 15 years' time. I don't think in Australia we've had a government serve for longer, for 15 years in our history. So politics is played on a 3-year scale, and it's as simple as that. And that is certainly one of the weaknesses of democracy, but it's one that we have to grapple with. But I think governments don't think as long term as the SDGs, and therefore there's no reward politically to indicate them, I guess.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jack, I would like to ask you on how can the youth utilize technology, and how can, for those who have access to technology, how can they use it for sustainable development?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question. Look, I think first of all, it's important to contextualize the word technology. The wheel, writing, the printing press, the steam engine, all of these innovations simultaneously advanced our species, but they also drew savage divisions between those who had access to them and those who did not. And digital technologies are simply the latest of these inventions in the human narrative, and they have divided the haves and the have-nots, perhaps to the greatest extent of them all. Unlike the last inventions I mentioned, the digital age has actually given birth to the digital world. And it's a world that you're either a part of or you're not. And if you're left at the gates of the digital world, you'll struggle immensely and perpetually to improve your standard of life, and also to contribute to actualizing the Sustainable Development Goals. But moving on to your question, there are myriad opportunities which digital technologies have to offer for ambitious and talented individuals the world over. And I've been so privileged in my role as founder and chairman of LiteHaus International to be a part of that intimately and see the impact that providing digital access has on people's lives and their ability to contribute to creating an equitable society. Digital technologies allow us to simultaneously short-circuit many developmental challenges, particularly those related to access to health, education, and livelihoods. I should say health services and livelihoods. E-commerce, for instance, it brings subsistence farmers in the highlands of Papua New Guinea in direct contacts with markets across Asia. Women in conservative rural Pakistan, long denied opportunities, can become entrepreneurs or share their story with the world. Students from rural India or the slums of Calcutta have an opportunity to study at premier institutions around the world if simply afforded digital access. And the incredibly talented student who I sat with in Papua New Guinea this time last year, within just 12 minutes of encountering a digital device for the very first time, he'd mastered the shift, space, backspace, and enter keys to produce a flawless paragraph. And, perhaps he develops innovative solutions to global warming, or perhaps he even develops a COVID-19 vaccine one day. Bridging the digital divide, that could be the difference between him developing our species' next technological masterpiece, or quite frankly, the fruits of his brilliant mind being banished to relative and permanent obscurity. And so failure to bridge the digital divide, it will sink our efforts to reduce other inequalities, and it will compromise any progress we make on all the Sustainable Development Goals. Humanity faces enormous challenges ahead, and yet too many individuals and their ideas and abilities are being denied the opportunity to contribute to addressing them, as they're not being heard. Access is their vehicle to participation, and digital equity is thus of absolute paramount importance to realising our global vision for a more sustainable and equitable world.
Thank you. Those are very interesting points that you had brought up and very important as well. If there are any last words that Ms. Judith would like to give us, we'd be happy to hear it now. Ms. Judith?
Yes, hello. Can people hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, we can.
So firstly, I would like to thank citizens for just holding the space for everyone, you know, to have this kind of conversation, to engage with each other and to listen to each other. And what I like about this is that we're harvesting, you know, the individual brilliances that are coming from wherever we are. And what is also interesting is we're stuck in our homes, and yet we're generating a lot of these thoughts, ideas, energy that it's going to help us perhaps, you know, provoke changes that's going to happen in the future. So for me, here's just like more of an invitation for everyone in this space, because as you all know, you're a generation apart. So my invitation is so that all of us, rather, I'm not going to exclude myself because I still have a couple more years left and I'm still inspired by what I heard from Anna and Jack, you know, and I'm inviting everybody to be more curious. You know, be more curious, not just look for problems, but look for solutions, you know, that's going to bring about maybe just a little change in your, maybe start with your own families and then extend it outside of that. Another is just to be more connected. Now we're seeing the power of connection more than ever, right? I was just chatting with Anna. I was chatting also with the other speaker, Mr. Charles Allen, and it's just good to be able to get connected. So we are tapping on other resources that perhaps can help us, encourage us, motivate us, and perhaps inspire us to do something. Another thing that I would also invite you is just to have more courage. I'm seeing that, but perhaps this COVID is going to set us sort of a little bit behind a little bit with some of our deadlines and all that. But let us all stand up together and do something more, because that's what the world is requiring of us right now, no matter what generation, young or old. And this is going to be another one is to be more creative. Just try and try and try. What's the worst thing that could happen, right? We fail and then we fail forward. We learn from those things. And last but definitely not the least is just be more compassionate. Be more compassionate to us, the older ones, for some of the mistakes that we've done. And I'm so sorry that we brought it upon your shoulders, right, to carry on the future. But with that compassion also is understanding. And we are committed to do changes, to supporting you guys in a way that we've never done before. So just more compassion for each other, compassion for the haves and the have-nots, compassion for the planet, compassion for the future. And maybe then, you know, we can have a much better world that is more sustainable, more humane, more just, more loving, and definitely more peaceful. So thank you for inviting me in this panel.
Of course, thank you. Thank you so much. I believe our time is up now, so I would like to conclude. Thank you, Ms. Judith. Thank you, Anna. And thank you, Mr. Jack, for joining us. Thank you all for your questions. And of course, thank you for listening. And all the panelists had given us interesting views on youth engagement, on sustainable development. And that concludes our panel discussion.